Hi, everybody. Ian Bremmer here. Question I'm getting from so many folks is, what do we think about the war? What do the American people think about the war? How is this going to affect Trump's legacy, the future of the United States? It's so interesting because when Trump ran the first time and the second time, he's been consistently talking about ending wars, being the president of peace, wanting the Nobel Peace Prize, so proud in the 8 wars that he says that he was involved in ending, and some of which legitimately and successfully, in my view. And that is clearly what the people want. On the back of forever wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and go back Vietnam, the most powerful country in the world has had a absolutely brutal record militarily over the past decades. In terms of the expense, in terms of lack of success in war aims, in terms of the human cost on the back of American servicemen and women, and of course on the back of the people of these countries. I mean, 20 years it took you to go from the Taliban to the Taliban after spending over $1 trillion and with so many lives ended and disrupted in Afghanistan, in the United States, among American allies, so many of whom joined the fight with the United States. So many Americans want to see the end of these wars. And Trump, in his first term, even though he gave away the store to the Taliban, negotiations that were very favorable to the Taliban in ending the war, and that put Biden in the position to get those troops out. The fact is that, whatever you think about the outcome, it ended the war. It meant that because of the negotiations that Trump engaged in, the United States stopped spending all of that money, stopped with the bombing and the destruction, stopped with all of the American troops that were serving there for years and years and years, and the impact on their families and their communities ended it. And that was a very, very popular thing to do, and justifiably so, in my view. Now, the fact that in Ukraine, President Trump has been consistent in saying, we don't want the United States to be playing a role in these forever wars. He said, I'm going to end the war. I can end it in 24 hours. He hasn't been able to end it, of course, but he wants to end it. And his effort in ending the war, even though it gives more leverage to the Russians than the Ukrainians, it puts more pressure on the Ukrainians than the Russians, in many ways repeating accepting a bad deal that ends the war over a forever war that you continue to fight with Afghanistan. The Ukraine strategy for Trump has been very, very similar. And I don't personally like the idea of going to zero support in terms of footing defense support for the Ukrainians. I think it leaves them in the lurch. It leaves the Europeans in the lurch. But it's certainly true that the Europeans should foot much more of the cost. And that is popular, universally popular in the United States, and was something that Trump ran on successfully and followed through. It is true that the Europeans have a larger common market than the United States, right? It is, in terms of the size of the collective EU economy, and the UK, it's bigger than the US. So they should be paying more for Ukraine. And it is much closer, and it's much more about their security than the US. So I think the Americans should be involved, but the Europeans should be spending more. That makes sense. And still, Trump ended American engagement to a very significant degree for very consistent reason with how he handled the Taliban and how he has spoken about Afghanistan, Iraq, Vietnam, and the rest. It doesn't mean that Trump has never supported military intervention. He has, and he did in his first term, including with Iran, and he has in his second term, but he has been consistent in wanting those interventions to be as small as possible, which means no ground troops. You give them an or else, you bomb what you think you need to bomb to accomplish your outcomes, and then you're done. So it's very limited, it's very tactical, and it has relatively limited cost, particularly limited cost on the United States. And we saw that with Iran the first time around with the assassination of Qasem Soleimani. We saw it in Venezuela at the beginning of this year. We saw it with the 12-day war that the Israelis started last June and the Americans got engaged in. But this time, it is a very, very different story. This time, we're talking about a $200 billion request for the U.S. Defense Department, which is more than the total amount that the Americans have spent on Ukraine in the first 3 years of the war, some $180 billion. We're talking about troops, with thousands of American troops heading to the Persian Gulf and prepared to engage in ground action to secure islands in the Strait of Hormuz between the Iranians and the Gulf allies, to take Karg Island, to take coastal areas so that drones can't hit the tankers going through, and other targets. There's a massive global economic cost already, and it's just getting started, because every day the strait is closed are major knock-on costs for oil, for natural gas, for fertilizer, petrochems, plastics, you name it, stuff that is not getting through the strait, and stuff that people are not going to have enough of for months and months and months. And also, Iran was not an imminent threat to the United States. Israel, certainly it was, and it's a much bigger deal for them. And therefore, it makes sense that the United States should support its ally Israel in the same way that the U.S. should support its European allies on Ukraine, in the same way that the U.S. should support Japan and South Korea on Taiwan and vise the Chinese. But the idea that the Americans would, the Trump position has been that all those allies should be doing most of the lifting themselves, should be footing most of the costs themselves, should be taking most of the burden themselves, and certainly don't want to spend huge amounts of money and don't want to risk American servicemen and women on the ground, don't want extended military operations. So Iran is completely different on all of those fronts. Now, it is true that the Iranian regime, the Islamic Republic, did try to assassinate Trump when he was a candidate. And so it's clear that he cares more about this personally. He takes it more personally than he has these other wars. And maybe that plays into it too. And his personal connection to Israel has been much stronger. And his commitment and willing to spend money on Israel is far stronger than it is for any other ally around the world. So that clearly plays for Trump, even if it's not consistent with the way his worldview applies to other countries. But it's clear that it's not what the Americans signed up for. It's not what the Americans want. And a long war, an expensive war with major costs for U.S. consumers, with servicemen and women in harm's way, this is clearly not what American voters have signed up for. Now, I do believe that so much of what Trump ran for, and the reason he won not once but twice, is because he understood where so many Americans were in a way that other candidates, Democrat and Republican, did not. He understood that Americans have heard lots of lines about a secure border, and they haven't gotten it. And he was the guy that was going to make the border secure, and that matters. They'd heard a lot of lines about free trade being problematic for a lot of American workers, that people didn't take care of the U.S., that the Americans were stronger and could do better. And he used that leverage to secure big deals to invest more in the United States from the Europeans, from the UK, from Japan, from South Korea, from others. I think he's popular on that, even if you don't like tariffs from a consumer perspective. But using that leverage to get more money to invest in the U.S., he's popular for that. He's popular for pushing the Europeans and other allies much harder on burden sharing and spending more money that they weren't spending on defense. Absolutely. But he is not popular at all on this war. He's not popular on getting the Americans involved in a war that's going to cost the Americans in every way, and is primarily being fought for the imminent security concerns of an ally and not the United States. And everyone understands that. He's not popular in the way he's handling Epstein, and the unwillingness to drain the swamp when it involves him and his friends. A two-tier justice system that the average American that voted for Trump thought he was the one that was, as an outsider, going to do something about. He's not popular for the wild corruption that is occurring under the Trump administration. The U.S. has long been the most corrupt of the advanced industrial democracies, but it has become far more so, far more coin-operated directly benefiting people that are insider trading on the back with billions of dollars on the back of inside information from the Trump administration, and no investigations into that, no concern, no talk about that. And all of those things are things that the American voter feels utterly hard done by. And so here, I think the longer this war goes, the bigger the problem that he frankly has, and that ground troops should be an absolute red line for Trump supporters. Again, so many mistakes made by Americans from the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, in supporting these forever wars that benefited the military-industrial complex, certainly, that a lot of people, wealthy people, didn't have to send their kids. They could find exemptions just as Trump got himself. But most Americans were affected, did suffer, and now we're set up perhaps to get the Americans involved in yet another. If I were advising Trump directly on this right now, I would say everything you can to find an off-ramp and declare victory is the smart strategy. We will see if that is where he goes. If he doesn't, it is going to be reflected in the polls and at the ballot box. That's it for me, and I'll talk to you all real soon.